Okay, so let me repeat a few things since we've got this finally worked out. It was all Bernice's fault. Anyway, we've got our screen sharing worked out, and I want to make sure that we're recording this so that for the people who choose not to participate or view at another time, have access to all of this information. Okay, so what you see on screen right now, which is being recorded, is the Illustrator desktop. Okay, and I have a new file here that's, and so we're just going to start by opening up and showing you how to open and how to open files, save files, and navigate throughout the desktop. So I have Adobe Illustrator open, and there's a variety of ways that you can open files. What we have right here from the opening doc is that if you want to choose from standard size documents, we can do that. So if we want to pick a letter size that's we want to create, or other common sizes for the web or an iPhone, if you're creating images for HDTV, you can choose standard sizes. And you can see that I also have some recent files down here that I can open. Another option would be just to simply go to File, File New. Okay, that's another option here. I can go to File New. I'm just going to pick a letter size here because it gives you some options here. At the top, it gives you other additional options from saved to mobile devices to web to print. Typically in my classes, since for the number of years that I've been teaching this program, we've been teaching for print, but you know what? Now that we're teaching online, this could be for everything. It could be for mobile devices. It could be for web. It could be for HDTV. But this gives you some standard formats that you can choose from here. So I'll pick letter size, and it just, when I select open, it gives me an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper is what it does. Now, another way that you can open files too, that I find extremely useful, and that you may want to do this for our class, is that you can go to File, and you can say that I want to, I'm sorry, let's go to, where did they put it now? File, it's open in, I want to open in Bridge. So, Browse in Bridge, there we go, I was in the right place. Bridge is an ancillary program that comes with all Adobe software. And it's a way to help organize files. It's a way to navigate with files from one to another, one platform to another. And as you can see, if I click on my computer here and I go to the desktop, that I have shows my messy desktop with all of my folders. But what I also can do, if I go back to computer, I can click, let me go on desktop here. And I want to go to, there's the Illustrator. I'm trying to find it here. I want, there we go, Illustrator lessons. They were right here. And so all I have to do is double click on the folder, and you can see that there are 2 files here. So I can go ahead and I can select one of these, and I'll go ahead and I'll select it. And it gives me a preview of the file. And then if I want to open it, I just simply double click and it opens in Illustrator. Now, the last way that you can open it, I said there's all sorts of ways, is that you can see that here's the file that I have here. If I want to, I can just simply click and drag, and that brings a file open here as well. Okay, so that you can just simply click and drag to open a file. I prefer using Bridge oftentimes. It gives me a lot of access. So we have a sample file that's open here. Well, let's go through all of the, the entire workspace and see what we got going on here. So the most important part of your workspace is over to the left. Okay, these are where all of your tools are. Okay. And then along the top, you have what I call the options menu. So that anytime you select a specific tool, it will enhance or add properties of that tool that you can edit from over here. And then to the right, we have panels. And again, anytime you have a specific panel selected, it will give you the properties panel of that particular tool or object that you have selected. And among other things, we'll go over panels a little bit more in a little bit, okay? So the next thing that I want to do before we talk more about panels and more about the layout of this in the workspace is that I'd like to describe or explain to you the difference between a program like Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop, okay? So I'm going to go back to my brand new file here. And I've got to move something around here. There we go. So I don't know how many of you are aware of the difference between Illustrator and Photoshop. But Photoshop, for those of you who have used it before, is a bitmap or raster program, which means that it's defined by pixels, and the quality of the image is determined by the resolution of the image. Screen resolution is 72 pixels per inch. A high resolution image generally used for print is 300 pixels per inch. By contrast, Adobe Illustrator is a vector or object-oriented program. Now, what does that mean? And so I want to illustrate the difference between the two. I'm going to come over to the left on my, over here, my tools. And here I have an ellipse that I have selected. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to Shift Option click to create my little ellipse. And you can see down at the bottom left-hand corner here, it has the default setting of a white fill and a black stroke. Well, I'm going to go up to my window and I'm going to open up another panel. And what I want to do is I want to open up swatches. So here's my swatch panel. And I'm going to select a fill for it. So I need to make sure that the fill is selected. And I'll select fill. And I have a nice, interesting pattern fill that I'm using for this. Okay. Now, because this is a vector or object-oriented program as opposed to a raster, it means that the images that I'm creating are defined by mathematics. So if I zoom way in on this, you can see that the quality of the image is superb. The curves are perfect. They're pristine. It's impossible, I think, for anybody to create something by hand as perfect as this. But by contrast, if I go ahead and I hold down my Option key, and I click and I drag and I move it over, and I make a copy of it. Now, you can see that I have two separate objects, so this indicates that we have, we are working with objects now. So, because everything that you create, every little shape is a separate object that is defined by mathematics. But what I can do in Illustrator, it is that I can convert these to raster objects if I wish. And vice versa. We'll see later on this semester is that you can take vector objects and you can take raster objects and you can convert them to vector objects as well. So what I'm going to do here with this object that I just copied is I'm going to go to Object, and I'm going to select Rasterize, and it's going to give me some options here. Typically, by default, with your default settings, it's going to select 300 pixels per inch, high quality. You can also select a medium quality or the screen quality or another. You can customize all of this, depending on what you're designing. If you were designing this for a website, 72 pixels per inch is all you need. But if you're designing this for print, then you would need something higher resolution, 300. And maybe if you're just going to email somebody, 150 would be adequate. Well, to demonstrate my point, I'm going to use screen resolution and show you what happens. Number one, when you have a raster image, they cannot, the objects can only be rectangular. And you can see by default, it made the background outside of the circle white. Now, I could have changed that to transparent, but the point that I want to make is that when I zoom in and we compare the images, can everybody see the difference? That I have to the left, the vector object, which is kind of flat, two-dimensional, stylized. The one to the right, that when I zoom in, you can begin to see those individual little squares or pixels. That's a huge difference. What the advantage then to working with vector is that you can work with very small file sizes, and they can be used for a variety of purposes. So, for example, if I was designing a logo, and a client wanted me to design a basic system for them, a letterhead, envelope, and calling card. So I only need a little tiny logo that will fit those sizes. But later on, they really liked the logo and they wanted to put it on the side of trucks, maybe the side of a building, and they needed to be enlarged to 30 feet high. Well, you could use the very same file for all of the different purposes. With a program like Photoshop, you could not do that, because if you enlarged it, as we saw a moment ago, I'll do that again, you would just see a lot of blurring and a lot of individual pixels. So that's the one aspect of Illustrator that works as an advantage, is that one small file can work for any number of purposes. The downside of it is that if you want super photorealism, it's very difficult to achieve. And even if you do something that is photographic, if you look at some of the samples on my website of student work, many of them are very good and are very stylized realism, but I don't think you would ever assume that those would be, those are photographs. Okay, so that's the difference between Illustrator and Photoshop in a nutshell. Okay, so I'm going to switch back over to this file, and let's look at this again. So this is a nice finished looking image, but if we look and we want to look around a little bit, let me go ahead and make this a little bit smaller. There we go. Okay, so this is in preview mode. If you want to see what this object looks like with all of the images or the objects that have been used to create this, all we have to do is go under View, and we're going to look at, I'm just going to hit Command-Y, Outline, right there. And this is what the image looks like without any coloration, without any gradients. So again, you can always go to View, and you can toggle back and forth. And you can go from Preview to Outline, or you can go back again to Preview. Command-Y is the keystroke for that. And that's one way of changing the viewing of your document. As I mentioned, over to the left are all of our tools. So let's run through some of them really quickly. The Move tool, or the Selection tool, is kind of your home base. And it might be easier if I switch again and I use over this object, this again, to show you what this does. That if I want to move my object, I simply, if I'm on another tool, you know, then I'm going to use that tool. But if I wanted to move it, or I wanted to resize it or whatever, I simply use the selection tool, and then it would allow me to click on the object and select it and to move it, you know, click and drag to move it from point A to point B. The next tool we have, which is also very important, and you'll also notice with the tools, is that with some of them, they have a little tick mark in the lower left-hand corner or lower right-hand corner. That means that there are other variations of that tool beneath it. So this is the direct selection tool. This is the one with the white arrow. So if I select here, you'll notice that this circle that I have here is comprised of what are called 4 anchor points with the tangent handles. If I select any one of those anchor points, I can begin to manipulate them. So these shapes can all be manipulated in any number of ways. Okay? You can start with a very basic shape like the circle, and you can turn it into a variety of different kinds of shapes. And the thing that's also unique about Adobe Illustrator and vector programs, object-based programs, is that you can edit these shapes infinitely. Typically with a program like Photoshop, once you've edited something, you can go back in and refine it and make changes to it, but it's typically much harder. This is basically non-destructive. And if you wish to undo some of those features, you just simply hit Command Z, similar to other programs. Okay? So there we have the Move tool, or the direct selection tool. If I chose to make a copy of this again, for example, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hold down the Option key and I'm going to click and drag to make a copy of it. And I wanted both of these to behave as a single unit. I could go ahead and I could select both of them by clicking and dragging. We'll cover more of this tomorrow. But if I shift click, select both of them, and if I chose to group them together, so under Object, Group, now they behave, anytime you click on one element, they behave as a group. So underneath the direct selection tool, I have Group Selection tool. Well, that doesn't mean that I'm going to select the group. It means that I can select individual elements within a group and edit them separately. And once it's done, once I've edited that group, for example, just simply moving them apart, then deselecting it and then using the Move tool, notice that they still behave as a group, but I've been able to edit one of the elements within that group. So that's what that does. Then we have our Pen tool. We have our Curvature tool. And these used to be really the core of Adobe Illustrator. We have our basic shapes, and that's what I use to create the circle. Okay. Again, if you hold down, you'll see the others. We have the Rectangle tool, simple rectangle. And if I want to change that, go back to the default. Black and white, I can do that. If I want to reverse it, I can click on this button right here. Right. And to deselect, you just simply go back and move off of the shape and deselect. I can also, under here, we can create a polygon. So if I do that, starts with 6 sides. There are ways of editing that. We have, under there, we also have a star tool, line segment, lots of variations, all the tools that you need. Which sort of brings up a point of what was this program originally designed to do. When Adobe Illustrator was designed and came out in 1988, it was used primarily as a substitute for graphic designers and people who were doing drafting at the time to hold on here one second. I need to check something. Okay. Yeah, it was originally designed as a substitute for old T-squares and compasses and things like that. So that's where, how this came to be, as a replacement for all of those things. But since then, it's become so much more. It is a wonderful illustration tool rather than just for mechanical illustration. We have a brush tool here, but it really, when you're using this tool, you're not, let me go ahead here. Let me go back to Window and bring up brushes. So here's another one here. Let's go ahead here. Run this one. Oh, no one. I've got none for the fill, no wonder. Let's go ahead and make that black. No, let's flip it. Change the color. There we go. So if you look at the brush tool, it looks like this was done with a very, rough, kind of splashy kind of brush. But in fact, we can go back in, and like I said, we could take the direct selection tool, and we can go back and we can edit each of these anchor points that comprise this and reconfigure the stroke any way we want. Okay, very different than working with than Photoshop. The next set of tools here, Type tool, very powerful tool. I think of most of the programs that are available, it's probably one of the most sophisticated. Illustrator is one of the most sophisticated for using and editing type. The next series of tools here are the modification tools that allow you to rotate, that allow you to scale, that allow you to flip or reflect or share images. We have an eraser tool, which is unique. Technically, you can't erase things, but it does work very nicely. We have the shape builder tool, which is added a few versions ago, and I think it's probably one of the strongest aspects of the program we'll be using. We have a different fill tool. We have gradients. And we have the mesh tool here. If you want to capture colors, or if you want to capture styles, we have the eyedrop tool. We have the width tool, which is really pretty cool as well. That's a nice addition. It came not too long ago. It was introduced not long ago. We have the blend tool for blending shapes together. We have the Artboard tool, which we'll get to soon. And then the zoom tool. Zoom tool is just what you might think. You'll be able to zoom in wherever you click. It allows you to zoom in. And when you hold down the Option key and click, it allows you to zoom out. If you're working on a laptop like I am at the moment, you can also use your touchpad to zoom in and zoom out. You don't need to use the zoom tool. You can be on any other tool. And you just pinch with 2 fingers and expand with 2 fingers to make it as big or as small as you want. So that seems to work pretty nicely. If you hold down the space bar, it allows you to click and drag throughout, move the object about. If you wish to create a new artboard, you can do so. Artboards are a pretty nice tool. They were added not too many versions ago, but I guess it's probably longer than I realized. But I'll show you that in a minute too, where you can have multiple, they're really separate documents, but they're all a part of the same file. And then we have down here, every shape that you see. Let me go ahead and ungroup this for a minute, so we can select these separately. Is that I could come back here and in the fill, instead of picking a pattern, maybe I want a solid color, maybe I want a gradient, I can do that. But what these little squares do is they tell you whichever one is in the foreground is the one that's active. So the fill tool is this one here that's solid. If I want to change the stroke, you can determine whether you want a stroke or not. Notice up here at the top, the options menu. I could change the stroke from the default 1 point to maybe 10 point. You can see how different that is. And just within a couple of clicks, you can see that I've already made significant changes from one shape to another. These little buttons right here indicate, what you want to be in the foreground or the background. And this allows you to select or the default foreground and background, white and black. And this allows you to flip foreground with background. And then we have different modes down here too, which are kind of nice. Okay. So by default, we have normal draw. We can say draw behind and draw inside, which we'll get to much later in the semester. Okay. Now, I sort of touched on this, but as I'm using each of these tools, you may have noticed that along the top here, the options menu changes. So that as I select one of these, it gives me over here the properties of it. It tells me, and to the right, it tells me the fill, it tells me the stroke. Also, it tells me the fill and the stroke over here. So there's a lot of redundancy built into this. And I can change all of these settings either from the top over here or the properties menu or any number of ways. There's just, it gets a little bit overwhelming sometimes. It's like whatever is convenient is what you should use. So that's what this does. And for example, you can see that under the stroke type here, as an example, I can change the stroke width. I can change the stroke type. Right now it says uniform, but what if I wanted to change it to from thick to thin? Okay, I could do that. You can change from a basic stroke to, again, I can pick any one of those brush strokes that I had selected, or a nice soft, or I can change it to a pattern. So if I wanted it to look more like a brushy kind of outline, I could do that from there, and I can change it back again. It also allows you to change the opacity of the object, and you can change the opacity of the object and the stroke separately. But again, that's a little bit more advanced, and I'll change that a little bit later. If you have a style applied to it, or wish to apply a style to it, we can do that, which are a combination of effects. We can come back in here, and you can change, you can recolor the artwork from here, which is, Illustrator has some impressive tools for recoloring artwork. We have some nice align tools here and distribution tools, which are what these are. Okay. Right now, all of the measurements are measured in points, but we can change all of that. So let me go ahead now, and since I don't measure in points, I'm going to measure in inches. I'm going to go to up to the Illustrator menu here and go to Preferences, and I'm going to switch to Units. And you can see right now under General, it says that I'm measuring in points, but instead if I want to measure in inches, then I can do so. Leave type in points and leave the stroke in points. That is the default measurement used for strokes and type. And now when I come back up here, you can see that the size of the object that's selected is 3.707 in inches. I can transform the object from here. I can skew it. I can do some basic things. There's just a whole variety of things. Anything that you can think of doing to these objects, you can do. So let's move on now to the panels over here. By default, the property panels is selected, but there are any number of other panels that we have at our disposal. Okay, we have, if we look under the window menu, you can see that there are any number of ways or any number of other panels available. The only ones that are visible are the ones that are checked. We have an align, even though I have a line up here, I have an align panel. We have an appearance panel. We have an artboard panel. On and on and on. And I encourage you to go through some of these and to explore them. The next thing that I wanted to cover, aside from all of these panels, which again enhance or allow you to make revisions to the shapes themselves, but also enhance or add functionality to the tools over to the left. What we can do is, let me see where I want to go with this. Let me go back over here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to File, Open. And I want to go to my desktop. And I'm going to also go to, let's see. I have to clean up my desktop sometime. Someday. Here's the Illustrator 19 lessons. And I'll go in lesson 1. And I'm going to look at start number 2. And you can see that there are 2 different pages here for if you're designing a card with 2 sides. That here's the introduction of the Artboard tool. So this is a good way of introducing the Artboard tool. Now, how you wish to view your desktop is as follows. You'll notice at the top here that this was set for web. Okay. By default, it should be set for essentials. And when I set it to essentials, you can see that the tools and the panels to the right change considerably. Okay. Panels to the right. Now, what I can also do is I can go to Essentials Classic. This is really the one that I prefer. They've made some changes and updated a little bit. And then, depending on what you're working on, if you wanted something that was more painterly, we could have a painting, right? A painting layout. So we have our color wheel here, we have our swatch panel, we have our brushes, and we have layers. So it's more akin to working the way that, using the tools that you would use for painting. Printing and proofing, tracing, typography, and web. And if you make any changes to these, so for example, if I go back to Classic, and I decide, you know what, there's some of these tools that I use all the time. I can click and I can drag these out. Okay, so here's color. Here's the swatch panel. If I prefer to have my swatches and my little color panel here, instead of inside and tucked away nicely in the right, if I prefer to do this, what I can do is I can create my own new workspace. And I'll call it Kirk's Workspace. Okay, so now I have my own workspace. And if I go over here again, come on. No, my mistake. There we go. If I go back to typography, for example, and then I go back to Essentials Classic, it goes back to the way I just set it. But if I go back and I say reset Essentials Classic, it goes back to its original, but you'll notice at the top I have Kirk's Workspace. So that brings me back to what I just customized. So that's kind of nice. Okay, so we have our panels to the right that add functionality to most of the tools. There's a bunch of them. We have, our brushes. We have our symbols, tools, which we'll get to later. We have a gradients panel, so you can create custom gradients. transparency panel, and layers is probably one of the most important ones, and artboards. Now, as you can see, if I select the artboard panel, because we talked about artboards a moment ago, that what we have are fundamentally two artboards for this. So they're the same file, but they're two artboards. So I can also use the artboard tool over here to come back here and edit these. If I want to edit the size, if I want to add another artboard to this, I can. Okay, that will allow me to do that. So here's the artboard tool, and along the top here, you can see that I have some options here. If I want to just simply create a brand new artboard, there it is, and it automatically duplicates the last artboard that was selected. If you want to resize the artboard, you can. If you want to delete the artboard, you can. And then we can just go back to our selection tool, and we're back to where we were with the two artboards. So we have, in one nice concise file, we have both sides of our document that we can print as a single image, or we can duplicate and print separate sides as we wish. One thing that I haven't specified is at the bottom down here. It will tell us what size we're viewing this. Okay, we can also change the size from here. So if I want to change this to 100%, see actually the size that it's going to be printed. It will give me a number over here. If I click here, I have the front and back, so that's artboards. It also tells me right now that this is set to selection. And I can say show current tool. I can say artboard name, date and time, number of undos. I kind of like that, but it's up to you what you want to do. Then when you're ready to save your file, just simply go to File, Save As, and decide where you want to save it. For us, we're going to save it on our computer, and then you're going to upload it to when you're done with the lessons. Right now, for lesson 1, there really isn't anything for you to upload. But when we do lesson 2, there will be. You get kind of a pass or a freebie for lesson 1. Save this on your computer, and then you can drag it into Google Drive, and then we're set to go. So that's sort of Illustrator in a nutshell. I'm going to turn off, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'd like to know from all of you who are still here, if any of you have any questions about what I've covered so far. I've kind of gone on and on and on for almost an hour now. No questions? No? All good? Yes? No? No? So we're about done with our hour today. Wait a minute. No, oh, no, you don't have to do, Madeline's asking to do lesson 00. You don't have to. You can if you'd like. This is just gives us today kind of an overview of Illustrator. And tomorrow we're going to do basic selecting, which is lesson 2. And creating basic shapes in lesson 3 and then 4. So, you know, this week, if you look at this week in class, we're going to go through 4 lessons, and that should get you up to speed so that you can begin to begin designing a mask for yourself. And I can talk about that more maybe tomorrow. Okay. I think what I'm going to do, since this is continuing to record, and I need to know from all of you, How many of you plan on attending my lectures somewhat regularly? Okay, a few of you. Okay. But for those who don't, I need this dead space here. I need to cut this out. Or I guess I could leave it. I'll just post it for today, and if anybody else wants it, then we're good. Yeah, I don't know what else to add. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of things. If you go over the lesson yourself, switching workspaces, I did that, using the panels for context menus.
Excuse me, Professor. Deborah wants to know if the class meets every day.
I'll be here every day. If you don't need to attend, then don't. Because this is asynchronous. You should be able to work on your own. But if you just look at the weekly syllabus, you'll know what lesson we're working on, when it's due, and then you'll need to upload it to Google Drive. And then you'll need to, for example, by the end of the week, start working on the mask assignment. And I can talk about that at greater length. And probably tomorrow or Wednesday. And it will be due by the end of next week. There are a variety of ways of approaching that assignment. There are several examples on my website that you have to look at. I mean, a variety of styles, so it's really up to you. It's more to demonstrate to me that you're understanding how to use the tools in Adobe Illustrator. Okay. So I'm really quickly here. I'm gonna, not that you have to attend, but I do want to make sure that everybody stays in touch with me every week. So for those who aren't here, I've got 10 participants today, but the class is up to 25. So there are clearly people who don't want to participate or can't in the webinar because it doesn't work for them. And that's okay, because this is meant to be asynchronous. So I'm just going to take down roll, and then I'll email people to make sure that they're have access to everything. And actually, see, Squires, Fuentes. So if anything, tomorrow, when I start my my webinar, if you take the time to go over what I've touched on today and go over Illustrator, if there are any questions that you have, I can start off by reviewing what we covered today. Anson, are you still there? No, you left? Because I don't know who Anson the Greatest is. Yeah, so I will be here every day. And it also, I will find that, I mean, especially starting next week, we're only going to do, I'm doing 4 lessons this week, but next week we will only be doing 2 lessons. So I can cover some of those lessons in a day, the basic principles, but then the following day is that maybe you're having issues or you want feedback on the mask assignment, the assignment that we're working on, or you're having trouble working on the lesson. or a particular lesson, then that would be a good time for us to interact with one another and to figure it out. Okay. Does that work? Okay.
And then Professor, also Deborah wants to know if she's still on the wait list or she's
This is Deborah,
enrolled.
Deborah Fuentes.
Yes.
Okay, so if she isn't, I can't, let me wait a couple of days to see if I get no response from people and if people tend to drop. And even so, I can always over enroll a little bit and I'll go ahead and I'll add her. Okay, so I'll put it to her this way. I will add her myself this week.
She said, all right, cool.
Okay. Because again, this is a new experience for me working asynchronously. So I don't know whether people are participating or they're not. You know, it's, I would prefer if people checked in and said, hey, you know, how are you doing? I'm here, all is good. I'm gonna leave the class now and I'm gonna go work on my own. That would be good for me. But, you know, you don't even have to do that, so. Okay, so if we're done for today, then I hope to see some of you back tomorrow. And maybe you'll have some questions for me. And be sure to email me though so that I can add you to Google Drive. If you haven't already done so, I haven't checked my email while I've been talking here. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.